Hello and welcome to JRT. I'm your host Johnny and tonight we review Pants Out for the Nintendo Wii.
Actually, it's more like Pants Out, but that would get annoying fast. So, Pants Out is a criminally neglected series from the 80s. There were a bunch of arcade games, a very popular NES version, a Super NES sequel in 1994, and then complete silence for almost 15 years. Today, the series finally makes its comeback, with Nintendo teaming up with Next Level Games to bring us this Wii remake. It's the story of Little Mac, a young New Yorker of small stature but great ambition that aspires to become the worldwide boxing champ. The actual game has deceptively little to do with real boxing though, with the ring simply serving as the ideal setting for a fresh new gameplay idea. From the NES era to this very day, it's a very popular trope to comprise a video game of a variety of levels the player has to clear on his way to the ultimate goal. Each level usually ends with a boss fight. These stage bosses might be gigantic and menacing as in Zelda and Metroid, or devious and quirky like Dr. Robotnik or the Robot Masters, but the showdowns would always play very differently than the levels so far. The key to victory would be figuring out attack patterns and exposing weak points. And there are Pants Out, basically proposing doing away with levels and just having one grand boss fight after the other. That's why the boxers are comically colorful, widely varied, and well outside the hero's weight class. There are also pathological showboaters, hopelessly exaggerating their attacks, calling them out, and even using props to further distinguish their style. Little Mac's sleeveless shirt and glass jaws headgear might be unlikely sights in a real match of this caliber, but Soda Popinski's refreshing soda bottle and Bear Hager's face squirrel are probably well outside any regulations.
You see, Pants Out is not about the sweet science of the real world. It's not about grueling training regimes, carefully balanced diets, pre-fight mind games and trying to keep your head while the opponent tries to detach it. It's about the sweet science of video games. It's about controlling the everyman/underdog as he surmounts the impossible and fulfills his dreams. Now doesn't that sound epic?
From the delightfully cartoonish, yet also sometimes daunting design of the boxers,
Holy cow!
to the authentic, if horribly cliched, dialogue, the presentation in Pants Out does its job great. It definitely resonates with both the premise and the humor perfectly.
But whether the humor will resonate with you is another matter entirely, as it's all pretty much based on exactly one joke, that each and every one of the fighters is unbelievably politically incorrect.
We're talking cowardly Frenchmen and neurotic, military-obsessed Germans here, but there's nothing mean-spirited about it. If anything, it's the local Japanese fighter that gets it the worst. What I do find insulting, however, is that the frame rate drops in a couple of instances. That's unacceptable.
Actually, unacceptable is when the frame rate drops during corners in Pro Evolution Soccer. This here is beyond words.
I mean, all they have to render is two fighters. Sure, the models are huge, there are a few props and the lifelike crowd, but still, this is hardly Metroid or Resident Evil. Just freeze the crowd for these processor taxing scenes. The fans in Super NES looked better anyway. It is not an elegant solution, but at least it's better than nothing. Thankfully, the developers weren't as sloppy when it comes to the rest of the game. It's commendable that each fighter speaks his native language, and their lines actually impact the gameplay. They spout trash talk whenever they knock you down, which really makes you want to beat them, and they shout various silly catchphrases before their attacks. Anything that clues you in on which attack is coming up is invaluable here.
Quite possibly the only ability that overlaps between real boxing and Pants Out is dexterity, and mainly the need for quick reflexes.
Your opponents telegraph their every action and you need to react quickly with the appropriate dodge or well-placed pants. Their tells rarely are self-explanatory though. Seeing your opponent shifting to your right sometimes means you immediately need to dodge left, but in some cases you need to wait a second then dodge right. Remembering which is the right answer to which move is paramount, especially since your enemies never really adapt to your playstyle. They obliviously keep following their attack patterns and fight themselves no matter how badly they're doing or how many times you fight them. So victory comes down to how fast you can figure out their tells, which causes the earlier fights to feel fresh out of a rocky flick. Little Mac takes a beating at first, but turns the fight around once you crack the attack patterns. It feels nice, but the game would fly by ridiculously fast, and without any memorable moments if the difficulty didn't crank up. Thankfully, a little more than halfway the second circuit, things started resembling the old arcades.
Back when I was just starting my descent to nerdiness,
video games lived or died depending on their difficulty. Without the storage space of modern times, they were forced to recycle their material and up the challenge if they wanted to last for more than one afternoon. But fine-tuning this is like a mystical art. Frustrating the gamer too much with impossible difficulty, or not recording successes enough are just as likely to result in a return to the store as the dreaded quick completion. The earlier Mega Man games had this down to a T, and even the recently released Mega Man 9 perfectly matches my skill level. Clearing a level for the first time might take me half an hour, dying every other screen, slowly edging my way forward, but once I've beaten it, I'll hardly need 5 minutes to do it again.
Unfortunately, Panzer doesn't do that good a job, as winning the fights often requires tiresome repetition.
Each time you knock your opponent down, it's an unofficial checkpoint. They'll start bringing their A game and slightly vary their attacks. But while the fight does become progressively harder, it doesn't change nearly enough to make the player feel compensated for getting that knockdown. There should be even more outrageous attacks and ridiculous one-liners. And of course, you have to start the fight back from the beginning whenever you're knocked out. While this makes sense, getting the first knockdowns again takes far longer than it should. For example, in this fight with the Great Tiger, it's his illusionary attack that gives me trouble. But even though I'm fighting perfectly, as far as I know, getting back to the point where he uses it still takes a while. I feel the most balanced the difficulty ever gets is with King Hippo's title defense bout. After you clear all 3 circuits and unify the belts, your opponents return seeking revenge. They have been remade better, faster, stronger, sometimes as a result of their training, but usually because they've added yet one more improbable gimmick. King Hippo's weak spot is his belly, so he covers it up with a sure lead.
Naturally.
Figuring out exactly how to break it off is good fun, and once you know the 3-part process, you can do it in seconds. It's also something you naturally learn through normal gameplay, not an obscure shortcut you can only stumble upon by chance or brute force repetition. Repetition is the name of the game as title defense continues, and the reaction margins approach 0. The rematch with Soda Popinski is a classic example. Even lightning reflexes aren't enough anymore. You really have to know what's coming up, and the only way to do that is to restart the fight again and again and again. A little frustration is good for you, but this is kinda pushing it. And of course, since there are no illegal moves, things do get out of hand.
I mean, check out the Irishman.
They naturally make him a loudmouth cheater, but I really didn't expect he to go beyond headbutts.
Here's one of my favorites, man.
You've gotta be kidding me, what's next, a gun?
The player only gets one advantage, but thankfully it's the one that counts the most. Tight controls. You can even choose between the classic scheme and the more gimmicky Wii variation.
If you are a power gamer, you might prefer playing with just the Wii remote. You hold it sideways and use it like you would a normal NES controller.
It's as simple and effective as it gets, even your special move is a mere button press away.
Personally though, I really prefer the Wiimote and Ansang combo because I'm here to have fun, not just win the game.
Obviously it's based on moving your hands around to punch, but it also relies on buttons, much more than games like Wii Sports Boxing. This actually makes it much easier to master. It's far more precise while still retaining the charm of flailing your arms like a child.
It can also be a bit of a workout, especially if you hold your hands up properly instead of going for gut punches like I do.
It's certainly harder too. You will throw the occasional extra punch or throw the normal one in place of a special, but this leads to the sort of frustration I find a guilty pleasure. The game does take into account that you can't gesture a punch as fast as you can tap a button. It offers generous windows of opportunity in between punches and allows you to get up from knockdowns and recover health with very little effort. This really lets you have fun with it, especially if you're playful and not stylish enough.
Get up, get up! Sit down, sit down.
It's also how I accidentally found out you can sometimes recover from the automatic knockouts if you shake hard enough. Both schemes can utilize the balance board, the peripheral you might remember from Wii Fit.
Right. So this thing senses your shifts in movement and translates it into dodge moves. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite as advertised.
It sometimes makes the controllers not work, and it habitually misjudges your moves. Getting a crouch in place of a side dodge is the most common, but you might also get a left instead of a right. With a lot of patience and effort, you might be able to work with it. It definitely presents a new challenge for you to try.
But I think we'll know of at least one more reason to have someone else play with the balance board.
Oh, it was a tough fight.
It certainly was pretty tight back there.
Yes, wait.
But since you are here, let's try out the multiplayer, shall we?
In head-to-head mode, both players control a variation of Little Mac. He now uses different kinds of punches, and they all take much longer to throw. This allows for easier dodges and star opportunities. In addition, besides the standard stamina and heart gauges, you also have the Gigamac juice meter to worry about. It fills up by hitting your opponent after making him miss. And when it's completely filled...
Holy steroids!
Gigamac is much more powerful, but also slower, so he really feels like one of the boxers from single-player mode.
Should I also start talking an obscure language?
I think you have to.
Πάτε και εκείνη, και άδες και αυτή.
It's all quite ridiculous, you can even perform poses for power-ups. Eventually, the Gigamac juice runs out and the fight reverts to normal. But since, unlike stars, the juice doesn't vanish unless you use it, both players are likely to get at least one chance as the big guy. It's important to make the most out of him, but Gigamac is far from unbeatable. In all, it's a very enjoyable mode, a slightly more strategic version of Wii Sports Boxing, and it's very important that you don't need an extra nunchuck to play. However, it's slightly disappointing that you can't use any of the other fighters, and a real shame that you can't play online. Games like these are most fun when both players are of similar skill levels, which, depending on your circle of friends, might prove tricky to arrange.
Most of my friends are into team sports games, so I can't even get one that can throw a decent punch.
Was that pants good enough for you?
Also, where are the minigames? The Wii is by far the most party-oriented console on the market, so it's pretty rare to see a multiplayer title without any quick and dirty minigames, especially since boxing video games traditionally have a bunch of them, usually focusing on the training, and especially since Punch-Out's training montages have been iconic throughout the series. At least, we do get an excellent exhibition mode. Here you can fight a hologram of your next opponent that has all the same attack patterns but can't actually damage you. You can also rematch a previous fight in search of a better knockout time or trying to complete a challenge. These range from mundane to creative and from fairly easy to nigh impossible, but they're mostly good fun.
I find this a very welcome alternative to the old standard of having to play the game all over again just for a high score, but we also get Max Last Stand mode.
In this mode, Mac retires after 3 losses, and you can't even restart a fight. Your opponents are selected randomly, and there's even a new fighter thrown into the mix. Due to the nature of the game, it's really hard not to lose the first time around, which means that if you want to unlock everything, you will have to play the game all over again after all.
The Punch-Out series has an intriguing premise, and they're all good games, but I fear that they are quite tapped out by now. This latest entry is by far the meatiest, with its title defense, Max Last Stand, and multiplayer modes, but I just don't think it has a signature punch.
The boss fight gimmick is the clear selling point, and it's great, but it's something I've already experienced with the previous Punch-Outs.
So while I really recommend it to anyone who hasn't played the originals, series veterans might want to wait for it to hit the bargain bin. Well, that's all for tonight. Thanks for watching the show. This is Johnny, signing out.